Welcome back to 10 News Conference. We're speaking with Deb DeBare, who's the outgoing executive director of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And you're moving on to the National Network to End Domestic Violence.
Yes.
Which is sort of an umbrella group for state organizations around the country.
Exactly. Yep, the National Network represents all of the domestic violence coalitions from all the states and territories and works on public policy and prevention and technical assistance and training all around the country.
Good news for Rhode Islanders is that you're not going to be moving. You can work remotely. You just have to travel a lot.
Yes.
Are there programs that you have been involved with or helped to start in Rhode Island that you would like to see that have been successful enough that you want to spread them around the country?
Yes, you know, one of the things that I'm most excited about that we've been able to establish here in Rhode Island is really robust prevention programming. And thanks to some funding that was planted as seed funding from the state a couple of years ago, we established a prevention fund to support local community-based initiatives. So, you know, sometimes people wonder, what does prevention programming look like? How can you prevent this? And in the old days, we used to think that if you went into schools and you had an assembly program or you had a play or a health class curricula, that you could teach children, young adults, about dating violence prevention.
Right.
But it's not that simple. And what we found is that we need to have a much broader, multi-pronged prevention strategy so that you're not just giving individual messages to individuals, but you're also changing society's norms and changing society's values. And so what we're trying to do with our programming is really create community cohesion, for example, so that people know their neighbors. Mm-hmm. You might think, what does this have to do with domestic violence? But what we found, and the research is showing, that when you use a public health approach, looking at some of the social determinants of health, and you look at what are the things that help people understand their neighbors, know each other, you can improve their health outcomes and you can decrease violence. And so it's a long-term strategy. We're looking at some real long-term programming effects that will take place over the next decade or two. But we're seeing some great progress in some of the model programs here in Rhode Island. In particular, there's one in Newport through the work of the HES, the Health Equity Zone work. So those are some of the examples that I'm hoping we can see spread around the country.
So where does that prevention go past the assembly and school?
Well, by using an approach that works with individuals as well as communities and as well as with society at large. So on an individual level, mm-hmm. we would be putting messages out to students about healthy relationships. You know, that's very helpful.
Okay.
On a community level, you want to have the parents, the school administrators, the healthcare community, the larger community supporting victims when they come forward and reinforcing the messages that students are getting. And then on a larger level, on society's level, we want to change the values that society has so that if society in general values women and men equally in relationships, values all relationships equally, regardless of gender, then we're going to see eventually relationships that are based on respect. It's a long-term goal. I know it sounds a little bit lofty, but we're going to get there in a couple of generations.
All right, so I see how you tell the kids what healthy relationships look like. Then how do you get the parents and the surrounding community to reinforce that? What's the actual...
Well, here's an example of something that's happening in our communities in the Pawtucket Central Falls area, for example. They're having a basketball tournament. What does that have to do with domestic violence? Well, everybody who signs up for that basketball tournament, before they start engaging in the team play, they're going to have an opportunity to hear from one of the athletes and coaches and to talk about domestic violence.
Right.
And they're going to start talking about it and reinforcing on a community level about how perhaps aggressive and violent behavior on the court, as long as you're not committing fouls, is really good. Let's think about how that behavior should look in a relationship. And so they're reinforcing it in an environment that you wouldn't normally typically think about talking about domestic violence.
Right.
It's pretty clever.
Well, that's definitely a different way of approaching it. Then what about the third level, the society-wide? Are you talking about like national TV campaign?
Well, we're talking about all levels. It could be TV, all kinds of media, all the messaging. think about the different types of exposure that people are young, especially young people, are getting with social media, you know, music videos and things. And if you could eliminate the references to violence, particularly violence against women, in those forms of media.
Then you'd end music videos.
Well, there'd be other ways of entertaining people. You don't need violence against women to entertain people.
No, certainly, but you need to get to the heads of the production facilities that are, or the bands, the people that are making the rappers. It's
yep. There's a lot of work still to be done.
Well, don't you feel in some ways that it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back sometimes? And you would think that after 2 decades of this message, that young women would be more respectful of themselves. Yet, I see a lot of, I mean, what about sexting? What about these teenagers? They're sending pictures of themselves or their private parts to, what, win favor with guys who have no respect for them? Do you sometimes get frustrated or wonder if we're moving backwards?
You know, sometimes it does feel like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but as long as we're still on that progress of forward, I can keep going. I think it's really important to recognize or to dig deep when looking at the newer issues like sexting and things like that, and think about why do young women participate in these behaviors?
Right.
They certainly, it's the culture. It's the bigger picture, the culture, that is giving them messages that this is the way they should behave, and they're getting supportive reinforcements from the culture. So we need to intervene and really stop that. We need to, if you know, for example, if they weren't getting pressure from peers, from boys, from their extended community to do these kinds of behaviors, then it wouldn't be happening. So we want to stem the tide, stem the appetite, cut off the need or the demand for this type of behavior.
All right,
and we want to be careful not to fall into a trap of blaming victims. We did that back in the 70s and 80s, and we don't want to do that anymore.
Okay, we'll keep talking about this after these commercial messages.